is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 572. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how's Thanksgiving week treating you?
Oh, it's just fine. We're doing a little low-key thing here at home, as one does these days. Though yeah. I decided, this of all years is a great year not to do a turkey. In fact, I just don't do a turkey at all anymore. I haven't for the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And for our protein, I'm actually picking up picanha from Fogo. So
what is picanha?
Picanha is the top sirloin, the little C-shaped one.
God, yes. Oh my God. Are you going to serve it off of a sword and everything, or?
No, I don't have access to a sword, and I'm not getting one for this. But we'll put it on a plate. It'll still taste pretty good.
So I have to ask though, are you anti-turkey?
Yeah, I think that turkey is pretty overrated. We don't eat turkey other parts of the year, even though we could if we wanted to. I understand it has significance to some people, and that's totally fine. But I don't really see a reason to eat something that I just think generally is below par.
You never order turkey at a restaurant. That to me is the best.
Yeah.
Right? You're never going out for a big turkey dinner tonight at the restaurant. Well, people do say that about basically every other type of food, right? Big steak dinner, true. Going for tacos, my favorite vegetarian place. Everything's covered.
It's kind of we're going to get a big Christmas ham, but it's but do people just go have a ham dinner, right?
Right. It's uncommon to say the least. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I'm setting up for the same stuff. And, along those lines, kind of a chill week, right? Thanksgiving's coming up. We all got to be kind of nice to ourselves right now, give ourselves a little bit of time off and to make sure that we're looking after ourselves, given the current state of affairs in the world and all that. And also it happens to coincide with a relative downtime as far as the set out. Zendikar Rising's been out for a long time now. We've done a lot of shows on it. We had a few guests on the last few weeks. We figured we'd have a nice chill show this week. We're just going to be kicking back, having some conversations. We're going to be telling some stories, talking about some stuff that we've noticed out in the community, or some ideas that we've had that just didn't really fit into their own entire show topic, but that we still want to talk about. So we're going to kind of potpourri it up here and give you a little bit of everything on the show this week. And hopefully it'll be fun to hang out with us.
I will say that I put in the name Thanksgiving potpourri as a joke, because potpourri is usually used to cover up bad smells. So, we're real potpourri over here.
But it is the name of these variety shows, right?
Yeah. Okay. I think the whole deal with a potpourri is also that you mix a bunch of different stuff in there. But
yes, it is. It's like stuffing, but for your nose. All right, so we're going to be covering a bunch of different stuff. But before we do, let's mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Now, CFB's got a lot of stuff going on. Christmas time's coming up. Here in the States, we've got the big run-up to Black Friday in the wake of Thanksgiving. So there's a few things to tell you about. First off is CFB Pro. There's a Black Friday deal for that. For $24.99, you can sign up for 6 months of CFB Pro and get $30 in store credit, which is $5 each month. That deal, though, is only available until Cyber Monday, which is November 30th. So it's a great thing to check out. You should definitely look into it. If you do sign up for it, make sure you use the affiliate code LR. That helps a lot. And then I'll put a link in the show notes for where you can find that. And, that gets you access to a whole bunch of extra content, deep dives on deck strategies, including some limited content there as in addition to all the stuff you normally get from CFB. Also, there's just Black Friday specials every day this week. So we're recording this on a Wednesday. They're unveiling new offers on Channel Fireball, like the Commander Boxing League, which is something that came out, yesterday as we were recording. You can check out the website to take advantage of all the offers. And, every day there's going to be new stuff. So make sure you check that out. And then also there's a 20% back sale this whole week. Any singles you purchase with not store credit, so cash, your credit card, whatever, you'll get 20% back in store credit. It's a special offer that will only last until Monday once again, and the credit will be added back to your account by the 15th of December. But this is really cool. 20% back on singles. If you've got a deck that you want to build, or maybe you're working on a commander deck or something along those lines, this is a great chance to fill out those last few cards that you need and get a whopping 20% back in store credit for that purchase. So all of that's over at Channel Fireball, and some really great deals leading up to the holiday season to buy things for loved ones or even treat yourself if you feel like you need it. The other thing to mention, of course, is our Patreon. That's patreon.com/limited resources. And I mention it every week. But that's because it's important. It's really important to kind of the lifeblood of the show. It supports us financially in many ways. And it is the reason why we have shows like this that are able to run for as long as they do and to continue to strive for the quality that we continue to strive for. We get support from our most dedicated listeners, and that happens via Patreon. That is a clean, concise, easy way to facilitate that type of a transaction. I know that there's been a lot of times before those things like Patreon came out where I thought I'd really like to support the thing that I like, but I don't know how to do it. It felt weird to walk up to somebody and hand them some money and is this even helping you? Is this the best model for you? And Patreon is set up so that that is as transparent and straightforward as possible. You know exactly what you're paying. You know how much. You can set a cap on it for a month. You can quit anytime, rejoin anytime. There's no you're not signing up for a subscription where you're locked in for a year. And then if your circumstances change, you can't get out. It's nothing like that. It's a completely open, transparent way to do it where you know exactly what you're going to be paying and what you're not. And you can change it in any way that you see fit at any time. And we always want people to feel, that level of transparency so that it feels like a good transaction for them where they know that they're helping us out and they know exactly what they're doing and there's nothing that's not on the table for you. So all the details are at patreon.com/limited resources. If you'd like to support the show, that's how you can do it. Okay. Oh, and speaking of that, by the way, Luis, Patreon question of the week. Let me dig up one really quick. I actually forgot to do so because you put in that thing. And when I put it in, then I go, oh, right, I need to go look it up. And somehow you're...
Or maybe it's because you just really don't value the patrons' input is what I got from that last spiel there.
That is completely ridiculous. All right, let me dig one up here. Okay, here's one. This is sort of along the lines of the nonsense. Josh says, genius or grifter, pretending to be interested in what a telemarketer is selling and pretending to get out your credit card in order to keep them on the phone, wasting time as long as possible. Basically, you're sucking up telemarketer time so that somebody else doesn't have to. Is that genius or grifter?
I honestly don't think it's really either. You're not really grifting them because their job is kind of to tell people things they're not interested in. They can't really complain if at the end of it someone's not interested in it. It's definitely not genius because you're wasting your own time. What are you getting out of this exchange?
Well, you might be a hero though, right?
You're not though. At the end of the day, these people also just this is their job. I'm not saying it's a great job. I bet most of them probably don't enjoy it very much. I don't really understand what the value is in making it so that these people have a harder time doing their thing. I guess you could make the argument that if you make telemarketing unprofitable, it'll stop overall, but we know that's just not going to happen.
How about if it's a scammer?
Scammer, I think I have way more sympathy for the person who wants to waste their time and mess with them. I've seen people they make the scammer pay for postage on what's just a box of rocks because they think they're sending them a PS5 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I get that, and I think that is fine, but I don't know that I would really want to spend my time doing it that way. So if that's what floats your boat, I guess you can go ahead and run it. But overall, I look at a lot of these things and I think it just sounds to me like these people don't have the great choices if this is what they're doing. I'm not saying I have sympathy for every scammer, but there's some scammers who's just they live in a place where this is the best opportunity they have to provide for them and their family. It's still unethical to try to literally rip people off. So I'm not saying it's a good thing. It is a bad thing, but I also do you need to kick someone who's down? Do you need to, do you really need to mess with someone who this is where they are in their life? I don't know. I don't feel the need to do that.
kicking people that are in a bad place. You're not a huge fan of it. Okay, good. That's a good stance. I'm with you on that one. That said, there's a systemic issue on both sides of that, right? On one hand, you have a situation where you have people that are driven to do these jobs when they might not even want to. And on the other hand, you have these horrible predatory companies that exist that, arguably are against the people that work for them and the people who they're trying to take advantage of, that ideally would go away. Okay. Let's get into our bevy of topics here. One of them that came up was I had a discussion on Twitter a few weeks ago with Lee Sharp. And Lee's a friend of the show, nice guy, works at Wizards, has done so for a long time. And he does a lot of the behind the scenes stuff for Arena. He used to work on Magic Online a lot. He'd even would help out with other departments too. And, Lee's an analytics person, right? He knows how to build models. He does a lot with NFL, like sports betting stuff and fantasy football style stuff where, he's extremely intelligent for starters, but also he has the ability to apply that, through spreadsheets, basically. I mean, he's like one of those Excel gurus that's just an absolute beast. And he's worked at Wizards for a long time. So a lot of the stuff that he works on are optimizing or developing the underlying structures to the things that we like. For example, on Arena, right? How does gold work? How does it work with gems? How much money do they need to produce per event to make it profitable, but not ripping off the person? How all of these things, well, these end up on people's desks. And Lee is one of the people that helps figure out these problems. And one of the things that came up in the discussion was Arena Opens. Is that what they're called? The weekend ones where you qualify, right? By being mythic. And then if you have a certain record on day one, you can get to day two. It's usually really good. You need to go, like 7-1 or 7-2 or something like that. And then you get to make it to day two. And then you're playing for real money, where you can get prizes into the thousands, and you're doing it from home, from the comfort of your own home. And it doesn't have this big cumbersome structure like the normal ones. But here's the thing that's been missing from these: limited. There are no limited versions of these currently. And this is what Lee brought up. And Ben Stark and I had said, hey, these are really cool. Like, we love these limited opens. And Ben said, now make these in limited. And I seconded his motion, if you will. And Lee replied and said, this won't happen in 2020, but we're looking into this, right? And I was like, okay. He said, a challenge is that day two draft doesn't work unless the number of players who join is in a multiple of 8, which is unlikely. May have to do both days as sealed. Are you interested if both days are sealed? And then that kicked off a conversation. So, Luis, I want to answer Lee's question, but I also want to talk about this in broader context of what do we want and what do we think it would look like? Because I'm telling you, dude, the first time I saw Arena, this is one of the things I thought of was I could play a high stakes limited tournament from home that would be, I could just play whenever I wanted or whatever. That's kind of the dream, right?
Oh yeah, that would be awesome. And Arena seems to facilitate that in a way that's very good. So it was funny when we were talking before the show, we were trying to figure out what our responsibility is here. What are we trying to get across? And our goal is not to literally solve every problem with this, because that's a little beyond the scope. Mm-hmm. But it is to do more than just say, hey, we want this to happen. So we've got some suggestions here as to how this could be run. First of all, I think that the current entry fee and win percentages or wins number of matches needed are pretty good. It makes sense to have 7 wins be the threshold to make day 2, and then if you get 7 wins on day 2, you get $2,000. 6 wins, $1,000. Maybe I think you do have to make it so I think it's double a limb on day 1, or triple limb on day 1, I think, and double limb on day 2. So you can afford 3 losses on day 1 and 2, and you're limited on your second loss, or you can afford 2 losses on day 1, eliminated on your third, and day 2 you're eliminated on your second, I believe. Is how they end up working out. But either way, it should just be kind of like the constructed ones. I don't see why those numbers want to be different. But then where you end up is, how do you make it so that you get to draft on both days? First of all, on day 1, it feels like draft works out pretty nicely, right? Mm-hmm. Like you just have the queue open. You tell people, just the same as in the normal Arena opens, play your matches early. If you wait too long, you may have trouble getting paired. In this case, you may end up where the people in the last couple hours can't actually fire a draft. I don't think that would actually happen very often because these things seem pretty popular. Mm-hmm. But if it starts at 7 a.m. Pacific and matches go till 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or whatever it ends up being, you just have to know that if you try to join the last hour, maybe 2 hours, you might be out of luck. And that's just part of the way this asynchronous structure works, and that's fine. And okay, so day one, the drafts fire. People who get to 7 wins make day 2. So on day 2, how do you do this? Well, there's a couple options. One is you have normal draft queues, and then if draft isn't going to fire, you could add bots to it. Mm-hmm. I don't really like that solution. I don't think most people would be that happy with it. Even if you didn't really know about it, even if they just gave the bots random names, like it would still cast a little bit of illegitimacy onto the event where it's like, well, you were in a draft, you probably had some bots in your draft. That's why your deck is so good. Like people would overdiagnose that, right? To a ridiculous amount.
They would. I wonder if there would be a scenario where you would have more than one.
Yeah, I guess it depends on this is just more complicated than constructed. If a draft is at 7 for 20 minutes, do you assume no one's coming and you add a bot? What about 30 minutes? Do you do 10 minutes? Like all that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The other thing, what you can do for day 2 is you can have fixed start times for drafts. You can say, the first wave of drafts fires at 9 a.m., then noon, and then the last one fires at 3 p.m. and just tell people like, these are the 3 opportunities. Like there's 3 different times spanning 6 hours that you get to draft, but these are the times we expect everyone to be there to draft. And if you miss out on those, maybe you miss out. And then you could still end up with fewer than 8 in one of the drafts, which is part of the problem with that. It's okay in my mind to tell people, hey, you wanted to show up and play your matches at 5 p.m., but there's no drafts left or matches left. And that's too bad. Like, I'm okay telling people that. I think that's part of the current system to some degree. There's always someone who's like, I tried to play my last match with 30 minutes left and I couldn't find an opponent. And it's like, look, I feel bad for you, but this is the way the system works. And you had ample warning that we highly recommend you play your matches early. Mm-hmm. What I don't think is acceptable is you show up at the drafting time and it's like, hey, look, for the last pod, there's only 4 people. So you last 4 people don't get to draft. That obviously is nonsense, right? You can't have that.
Right.
Our producer, Jeff, had I think, a really good idea, which is you join the day 1 queues, those fire, and then you end up in a spot where once you hit your 7th win, you can rejoin the queue, draft your deck, and you don't play out the decks until the next day. Mm-hmm.
That way you have everybody there sitting there. They don't have the excuse of I didn't know or they didn't show up. They're literally on their computer and they get thrown into the queue once they hit the threshold.
Right. And or have a very like stern warning that says, hey, you have to draft your day 2 deck today.
Right.
That sort of thing. So that could definitely do it. The other thing, and now we're getting far afield, so I don't really know how their program works or their queues work or whatever. But what if the Arena Open, all the drafts that people did were just part of the normal draft queue? Like when you joined, you went to the Zendikar Rising draft queue. Like you join in the Arena Open, but where it drops you when you join is just the same queue as everyone else. I don't see that being a bad thing. Like you're joining with the general draft populace. Those people are pretty good. It's not going to be a huge difference. And if it gets everyone to draft, that could be an awesome solution to this.
Yeah, that could be interesting. The way that, people like Lee and them have to think about this is that exploitable? And it feels like it would be extremely difficult. The only scenario that came to my mind would be if you and somebody you knew to be in the thing happen to sit next to each other at the table, then maybe. But even then, that is so unlikely, right? Like you're being randomly, even if you tried to join at the same time, like it just, I think you could probably set in some software that would say, like if there's 2 people that are both in the Arena Open, hold one until the next draft. And, you could queue them in that way because so many drafts fire that you could conceivably have it be 1 person per table is actually in the Open, unless they were super, super popular. But
yeah, and I think that actually could go a long way towards solving the issue that we're kind of talking about here. Mm-hmm. And at the end of it, the reward is pretty big. We get a draft open. Like, doesn't that sound sweet? Like,
it does.
And you can join day 1 if you brick. And I think that part could be really cool too.
Yeah. Now, what about what Lee said? So Lee said, would we be cool if one or both days were sealed? Now, I will tell you, a lot of people, including Ben, answered yes to that question when Lee asked it on Twitter. Now, I didn't. I said, I kind of questioned his question and said, well, if you're going to have something called like a limited open, but not have booster draft be part of it at all, is that really where you want to be? Right? Because I don't think it is. But also, if you just take everything off the table and you're just a consumer, you want things, right? I want a car that goes 500 miles an hour and gets, 700 miles a gallon, or, it doesn't even use gas or whatever, right? Okay. Well, here's the closest thing you can get. What do I want as a consumer? I want all draft, right? I want human drafts at the highest stakes that I'm allowed to play for, right? Okay, so that's what I really want. Now, if somebody came along and said, you can have nothing or you can have sealed, of course I want sealed, right? I actually like playing sealed a lot, so I would actually enjoy that quite a bit. But when I first saw Arena, the dream that I dreamt was not sealed, right? It was draft. And so, I kind of want to push on Lee or, people at Wizards to know that that's what we really want. And I also feel that if they did give us sealed, it would be cool and I would play it and I would support it. But after a few of these ran, the drumbeat would start, right? It would be, why can't we have draft for this? Because that's what the killer app is, if you will, right? That's the thing that people really want. Is draft. Where are you at on that? Would you like to see a mix? Like, is your ideal?
Oh, I just wouldn't play in the sealeds.
You wouldn't play in them. Okay.
Nah.
Well, what if they were mixed like GPs were and most events are, in fact?
So it was funny. We were talking about this, right? If we think, like, I could see a world where draft is day one and sealed is day two because draft day one is easier to manage, but that just feels so weird to me that I don't know that I would be interested in that,
Yeah, same. Yeah. And, and to be clear, what we're describing here is a scenario where, because you can engineer a tournament, I believe, to produce a specific number of players at a given cut. So you could have it give out a multiple of 8 at the end of day one. Let's just say 64 players for simplicity. But the issue comes in with, what if 62 of them show up to draft and 2 of them don't? And that is a tournament reality that will 100% happen, over the course of time. So then what? Now you've got, some number of pods that will be filled up with 8 players, but there will be either one with far fewer than 8 or multiples with 7. And that's the problem that we're trying to solve here, by coming up with these different ways to do it. Because, and this is what Jeff's solution, helps address, is that if the person sitting in front of their computer, that has to, then, they don't, it's much harder for them to not show up for the draft. One question that I do have, Luis, is what happens if 8 players show up and 1 disconnects?
The same thing that would happen in a disconnect in a draft normally.
Right. But is that the equivalent of a bot drafting your table, or does it just use some really basic algorithm?
I think they use some algorithm. Like from what I've noticed, I think it reserves picks by rarity than by your colors or something kind of basic like that.
Okay. And that would be unacceptable if we had 3 players of 7. And I'm not talking about a disconnect, but I'm saying, what if nobody showed up?
Oh, I see. Oh, I think that we, in order for these drafts to happen, my guess is they would have to have a robust system that can account for there would not be a system unless it was very high stakes in a small field where you have to have everyone show up and be there drafting. Like, which could happen. I mean, Magic Online did used to run these draft opens that were just 2 drafts and 3-0 makes you the second draft, then 3-0 you win or whatever, 64 players. If someone gets disconnected, that's just what happens. It's not a big deal. Someone gets random picked.
Yeah. And because that's what I'm wondering is, we're striving for like a lot of integrity and a lot of like, not just tournament integrity from like a, cheating or taking advantage of it standpoint, but also just like in the best experience possible. Yeah. But what are we willing to give up to actually get drafts? I'm actually willing to give up a lot. Like I would do,
I honestly think that because a lot of this is concealed, this is not like let's say you went to the Pro Tour and it was day 2 and you walked over and then the last table had 4 players and 3 bots handing them cards like robots. You'd be like, what is going on? This doesn't make any sense.
Right.
This is nonsense. But when you're in one of these, if people don't know, yeah, maybe that there's a bot in some of these drafts. I don't know. It's not the biggest harm or that someone's like disconnected or something like that. But honestly, I think that the best solution is to find a way to integrate it to the normal queues and just play your decks in the open. I think that kind of elegantly solves that. That being said, I have no idea the structure of Arena and whether that's even remotely possible or something that would take a lot of work. That's not really our job to figure.
No. The other thing that does solve as well is, we don't know how popular these would be from a numbers standpoint, right? And you do need critical mass to be able to fire things in a timely fashion if they're all grouped. Right, where this thing just puts you into the general draft population. And as we know, there's plenty of demand for that. If you want to draft on Arena at basically any time, day or night, almost any of the formats that they have, you won't wait more than a minute, to just get in.
I will say that I did one of the Twitch Rivals drafts where you joined the queue, drafted your deck, and you got 3 runs to get as many wins as possible. Mm-hmm. And that was just a ton of fun.
And that was in the general population too, right?
It was just straight up, you just drafted in the general population, played your matches in the queue, and then just added it up. And it showed me that the appeal to drafting is really strong, and it felt very legitimate even though I was drafting in the normal queue. The fact that the other people in the queue didn't know I was in this tournament just doesn't matter. It's the same with the Arena Open. The fact that you join a queue and then 2 people are from the Open or 1 person is or 3 people are, it doesn't really matter. You're still just drafting Zendikar and then playing matches of Zendikar against other people who drafted Zendikar in these real drafts.
That's right. Also to shore up any possible thing, they could, I'm sure, easily make it so that you can't see the correct usernames of the other people while these events are going or something, right? Just to shore up any possible.
But even then, I don't even think that matters. Like, how do you know someone's in the Arena Open? It would just take this weird confluence of factors, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It would, but like if they came up, right, this would just close the door on that.
Totally. It would be easy to close that door. I don't even think it needs to be closed.
I agree with you. I agree.
Like it's just, again, it's also dispersed. There's so many people involved.
Yeah. And then, the last thing to keep in mind, at least that I keep thinking of is that remember, that scenario that you described, like at a Pro Tour formerly, where the pod wasn't a full 8 players and there was bots there. Well, that actually happened just without the bots. Like that happened routinely where there would be a pod with 7 players in it and they just have to draft. And yeah, you could make an argument. Well, this isn't the same thing, right? I'm drafting against a different number of players than everybody else in the field and all that. But these are tournaments. There's going to be the occasional rough edge as long as it's not a disaster, right? As long as it doesn't significantly diminish the experience or the expected value of the players, that has to be factored in, right? You have to assume that that's going to happen. Well, I hope they can do it. We know that there has to be a solution here somewhere. The question, whenever it comes to games and game companies and really any company is, they have limited resources, right? They just do. They have to be able to point. They have the ability to point resources in different directions, and they have to choose the ones that will help them, be beneficial to the biggest number of people on their platform while also generating them the most income. And they have to find a balance. If they go too far towards all we do is point our resources towards income, then they don't develop bedrock things that can become income earners later, or quality of life things that degrade over time where your player base will eventually leave. If they do too much of that, where they're like putting all their effort into some obscure draft open thing when core functionality is missing, then obviously the downside to that, becomes obvious. So, that's kind of what we're balancing here. But I was really happy to see from Lee that they were thinking about it. He said, we're looking into this. And while it won't be here for 2020, because these things do take a little while, if we can get a kind of an idea of what we want and they can sort out the details, maybe we could see this next year, which would be really exciting. To me, that would be Arena living up to its promise for me, right? For the type of player that I am, to be able to play for a few $1,000 on a random weekend on Arena without leaving my home. It would also give me something to aim for as far as getting Mythic, right? I've been doing it because I just kind of enjoy the idea of like, this is one of the few things as a limited player that I can get rewarded, even though it's not really a particular reward. It's just a pat on the back or whatever. But, you know, I got Mythic this season really early, and I've kind of been toying around with it and trying to get my rank up as high as I can go. I got to 9th, by the way. Now I'm in like 50 something, but it goes up and down a lot. But the point is, I'm hungry for this stuff, right? I would love to be able to play, you know, a tournament that was relevant and important to me, you know, beyond just booster draft. And the truth is, I'll just keep booster drafting forever, right? Like I won't leave because of it or anything. But boy, when I first saw Arena, that's what I wanted. And it sounds like we're getting pretty close to being able to have it.
Yeah, I think it would be incredible. It also would kind of dovetail nicely into our next topic.
Right.
Which is what is limited, or what should limited's role be when it comes to professional play or competitive play or both, right? Like where does that go? And if we had a draft Arena Opens, that would, I think, give a lot. It would not only demonstrate interest, like what happens if these draft opens just have a ton of people in them, right? It would also give people a training grounds. It would give them a lot that they would need to get to the point where they could compete at these high levels and increase interest in them. It's just everything that we kind of want out of these tournaments.
It really is. Like, think about it. It could be really the golden age of competitive limited, right? Because we think of that as the Pro Tour, or even in earlier iterations of the Pro Tour where they had entire Pro Tours that were just drafting of various types, Rochester or even regular booster draft. And to me, that was the pinnacle as we see it. But digital drafting makes it so much easier to get the requisite number of people in the right seats and do it. Drafting in real life in a tournament setting is cumbersome at the best, right? I mean, if nobody's ever seen it happen in real life, there's literally a judge on a loudspeaker that tells you every action that you take, right? They say, okay, pick up the next pack. And then a certain amount of time goes by. And it is a very specific amount of time that judge is looking at. And then they say, draft, pass the pile to the player on your left. And then everybody has to wait until everybody does that. Now they're hovering over the pack. Pick up your pack, right? And this happens for every pick, all 3 packs. It's very, you can't look at the cards in between. There's all these things that come up when you're trying to organize large scale draft tournaments that just evaporate when you have it on Arena or on Magic Online, where the seats are populated, the cards are all automatically hidden from each other, the clocks are built in, all of it's there automatically. Imagine if we could scale this up to the competitive level. This could be the most popular draft has ever been, right? Which is really promising for us limited players, because talking about our main, little talking point here, what's the place of limited in professional Magic? Because right now it doesn't even have a home, right? No. The last 3 major tournaments that we've ran, and the one that we're about to do in a couple of weeks' time here, it doesn't have limited as part of the tournament at all.
Yeah, it has no part in the tournament. It has no part in the qualification process. Playing limited doesn't really impact or almost anything. And in fact, that was true even before the shift to online play. And I know that's a temporary thing due to COVID, but even before that, limited was already taking a pretty big back seat, where yes, it would show up in Pro Tours, and some Grand Prix, but it was the first thing cut whenever there was a tournament that had to choose between formats.
Right.
And there are reasons for this. It's not just random. While limited has some challenges in terms of high level event coverage, people just don't watch limited tournaments. Mm-hmm. Like we both know that, right? We've been involved.
Well, it's hard to say. So I don't agree with that statement full stop, but way fewer people watch them than watch Constructed, which is really the metric here, right? The amount of people that watch limited tournaments is significant, but much lower than when there's Constructed involved. I've found that the people that watch are more dedicated. They're like the hardcore crowd. That are really there. Like if you're watching a limited tournament, you're like the most into Magic that you can get. But those numbers are significantly lower. And that is a fact of life, that when you're putting on a broadcast, you're not only concerned with the final number viewing. That isn't how you do a broadcast, because then broadcasts become all the same thing, and that same thing ends up being not Magic, for example. So, there's, a lot of reasons why it's okay to put stuff up that doesn't get literally the best billing, but you have to really, like, perfect example. COVID hits, the tournaments that were scheduled to go in real life get scrapped. Instead, there's a conversion to some other tournaments that end up being online that aren't really replacements for those. So they need to make up, well, what are we going to do with the formats? What are we going to do? And they become constructed, right? Because that is the obvious place to go. Like if you were to get thrown into the situation that the people behind the scenes at Wizards did, you would definitely come out with, we're just going to do constructed for these the same way that they did. The question is that temporary? Because there's two big factors at play here. One of them is COVID changing it and forcing the issue, shortening timelines on preparation and really demanding a simplification for those tournaments that happened this year. And the other one is Arena and the limitations that it has currently with the things that we were just talking about with, well, what if there's 7 players? I don't think Arena can even do 7-player drafts, right? At all. So there you go. Right. And there's a whole lot of, are these bots good enough? Would it not be fair? All of these limitations, when it comes to playing the matches with your draft deck on Arena, especially if you're doing cross pod. In a big pool, they have that set up, but for a specific pool, we don't know if they can do that yet. They may have just not put the development into that. So those are things that got sprung on the Arena team as well that were perhaps in development, perhaps not, but at any rate weren't ready yet for, professional high level play. And we even saw that at the World Championships before COVID was in full swing, where we actually drafted in real life and then ported that over for the viewing experience on Arena. Right. So we know that Arena, even though it's been out for a few years now, still has some of that type of functionality that's not the first thing that you would do if you were making a game, but it does come down the roadmap at some point. It's not here yet. And that's the kind of question I have, and I want your take on, Luis, is are we going to see limited phased out effectively as a result of this, or is it temporary because of the temporary things like the state of Arena and because of COVID?
Well, if we don't do something, we actually will see it phased out when it comes to pro play to a degree. Mm-hmm. Like it can't get much smaller than it already was pre-COVID.
Right.
Like it was already reduced in scope and stature there. It was. It's not going to end up in a spot where all of a sudden tournaments come back and it's like, yep, it's now time for the golden age of limited, all draft PTs. That's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. What we can do, I think, is present some of the reasons why something like this Arena Open could be really healthy, that it enfranchises a lot of other players. There's a lot of players who only interact with Magic through limited, that this is how they play Magic. This is what they enjoy. And I think connecting pro level play to that could be cool, or even just competitive play that gives them a step up, because not everyone who wants to play in a competitive tournament wants to go to reach the pinnacle of competitive play. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of room there. But what it does when you have like an Arena Open, when you have more events that are limited, that could draw people's interest upwards as well, into becoming more engaged, into becoming, a bigger fans. And I think that focusing on the gameplay experiences of Magic tournaments versus just how well that they are, how good they are to cover, I actually think Magic in a lot of ways has gotten worse when they've optimized for views over quality. Mm-hmm. Like it used to be that a lot of these tournaments, I feel like, were built from the perspective of the people playing in the tournament.
Yes.
And as someone playing in the tournament, I no longer think that's the case. I think they're designed for the people watching the tournament. I understand that. I'm the last person you have to explain the economics of the situation to. This has been my career on both sides of the aisle, as it were. Like I understand what it takes to put on a show, to cover a show, to want to monetize a show, to play in them, to qualify for them. Like I've been in all these places, and I feel like the philosophical shift has been to let's make our tournament more, quote, esports friendly.
Esports, yep. Mm-hmm.
Hashtag esports. I think Magic's lost something by that. There's things they've gained too. I'm not saying it's all downside, but I do feel like Magic has lost some of what the secret sauce that makes Magic Magic, because Magic is not as fun, I think, like if you were to compare them, not as for us, the invested player, but just for the average viewer. I think Magic's a harder sell than League of Legends, than Hearthstone. Hearthstone has a lot more of a pleasing view to it, something like Battlegrounds especially. And or Among Us. Like, how much Among Us have you watched in the last 3 months?
Hours
right?
and hours and hours and hours. Yeah.
It's just such a watchable game. And that's part of why it's blown up on Twitch, especially. Magic, as much as I love it, best game ever made, this is not its core competency. I think that Magic can be really fun to watch, and a lot of people love doing it. I think that if you try to compete only on that axis, there are other games and other things people can do that are going to beat you there. It doesn't mean you can't exist there. It just means you're not going to be as good. Whereas, as someone who's played all these games, Magic is the most fun of all these to play. Like, look, I love Among Us. Am I going to be playing Among Us in 3 years? I have no idea. Am I going to play Magic in 3 years? I would be willing to bet quite a bit on it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so, I wonder too if there's something to be said for, like, a lot of times we view esports or whatever in the lens of traditional sports, but the huge difference between them in almost all cases is that the people who watch most esports also play that game, right? Where, like, most people who watch football don't ever play football. Right. They don't touch a football. They've probably never even played football, and they could show up on Sunday at their friend's house decked out from head to toe with their favorite team's gear, face painted, all of it. Right. And they've never played a game of football ever. Right. Because that isn't what you're in it for. But when people play or watch League of Legends, they like to play. Not that they don't have to be hardcore pros, but they like to play on the weekend with their friends or whatever. And therefore, when they see what the really great professional players do, it's that much more mind blowing because they've actually attempted those things and can't do it. And with Magic, to me, it's a part of a bigger ecosystem for people. It's a lifestyle type brand, right? Yeah. It's a thing where you're like, I'm a Magic player. So checking out the thing on the weekend is like, I want to keep up on what's going on the thing that I care about. And of course, Magic players play Magic. Like, there's very few that are just strictly observational, right? Most of them have or do play. And what I wonder is, even if people aren't as keen to watch limited play that often, I bet you these draft opens would be wildly popular because the hardcore draft crowd has just been starved for any type of high level thing for so long. I bet you more people would play in it than would watch.
I mean, look at the, all the people the draft masters we know who just like battle for number one mythic when they know it doesn't matter. There's no intrinsic reward for it, which I think is really cool. That actually demonstrates why these things are so powerful. If people are willing to do these things for no payoff, they're definitely going to do that if you give them a reason to do it.
That's right. And I mean, and I think that backs it up exactly what you said. People are willing to, I mean, hell, even I admitted I do it, and I don't really care about like watching a meter go up on a screen or whatever. Like, I like playing and winning, but even me, I'm like, well, this is something that ostensibly matters to someone, right? Like, that's what I'm clinging to, right? You know how to make it really matter? Put money behind it. Just put up some money for the prize pool or whatever. And I care, because it legitimizes it, right? You're not playing for the money, right? But you're saying this is something that other people are going to want to do, and I want to put myself in that.
Because it matters. Because it matters to you to get to post on Twitter the graphic that says you made day 2 of the draft open.
That's right. Seriously.
Alongside the deck you drafted. No, it totally does.
And a feel of accomplishment too. I mean, this is why playing in GPs was a thing. And, I think that this opens it up to a broader conversation. But just to touch on the point, with the way that organized play has gone in Magic, it's undergone seismic shifts over the past 3 years that haven't really stopped. Like, they're kind of settling now, but it's taken a while to kind of get to this point. And one of the keys to it is that it's very difficult to explain the OP system at any given point to a player who's at the bottom of it, and to tell them how to get to the top of it. Where the prior system, that was one of its great strengths, right? You could go to a local game store and somebody might say, I'm going to go play in a PTQ this weekend. And you go, well, what's a PTQ? And, it's a Pro Tour qualifier. If you win it, you get to go play at the Pro Tour. Oh, okay. Then what else could I do? Well, if you do really well at the Pro Tour, you get to keep playing on the Pro Tour and they'll pay you for it. And you might even get to play the World Championship. Oh, okay. That's cool. Right? Then when regionals comes up, it's like, oh, that feeds this thing, right? And I could see this path where I could go local store, PTQ, GP, PT, WC, right? There's a path there that I can explain in 5 seconds that is just logical. It just makes sense. Regionals used to feed nationals. Oh, I get it. I play in my region and I get to play against the best that won from all of the country that I'm from, right? These things just were logical and clicked. And now it's like very convoluted, right? From a very big picture perspective, it's fairly simple. MPL, rivals, everybody else, right? Challengers, as they'll be called. But it is, I cover this for a living and I would struggle to give you detailed information about how all of this works. Like when a tournament comes up that I'm covering, then I do a dive and go, okay, how does this all work? But I don't know it from a big picture. And I'm the lead play-by-play for that tournament series because it's difficult, right?
Well, Marshall, you say that, and this was literally an hour after you asked me, what is this Zendikar Rising Championship? Because I told you deck clips were due on Sunday.
Right. And but here's the thing. It's not just me. The players also don't really understand. They go, I don't know. I'm going to show up and win as many matches as I can because I know that that's still rewarded,
So there's a couple things that are going on that I want to get to. One is that the OP system waffling, flip-flopping, or not even flip-flopping, but just changing course multiple times. And part of this was COVID, but part of this was not. Part of this was the esports MPL push has made a lot of people disengage with it. I don't want to fall into the trap of thinking the previous system was great and simple and the new system's bad and complicated, when the reality is they're both complicated. They both had ups and downs. Yes. I think the old system was better, but I think part of it is we switched from the thing we knew to the thing we didn't know. But the thing is, a lot of people, that's all it took. That's all it took for them to check out.
That's right.
It's kind of like if the restaurant you love changes their menu and you go and you have a bad experience, you might just be like, well, I'm just going to go to another restaurant. There's so many restaurants.
That's right.
When Magic did that, there's a lot of games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that it illustrates your point, by the way, about the esports push versus the more like foundational kind of bedrock attributes that makes Magic, as deep and beloved as a game as it is that the old system was incremental. It was more graduated. You could be a platinum, you could be a platinum professional, a gold, you could be a silver, and even a bronze. And each of those came at different point thresholds that you could get points from different types of professional level tournaments, primarily Grand Prix and Pro Tours. And this was something that, you could be aiming for gold, but get silver and kind of get a rebuy the next year to try to take another shot at gold. And if you had a really good year, you might get to platinum and ride that for a couple of years before dropping back down to gold or silver. And the problem with that is that if you are trying to do it from an esports perspective, that's much harder to sell. Right? There's a bunch of little individual races happening that are very difficult to track and somewhat obtuse. And at the end, everybody kind of slots in where they slot in. Now it's stratified where it's like MPL, rivals, and then there's going to be tournaments that are over the long term and also over the short term, like a play-in style tournament that is going to determine where people slot in for the next season. And that's much more exciting. And to be fair, we haven't seen that yet. Like going back to what you said, Luis, about how they went back and forth and waffled and it kind of turned some people off. I feel like we still haven't gotten our plate at the table yet at the diner that we're used to because they're kind of going back and forth. But until this season finishes, and assuming that there aren't again seismic changes to it, then we'll actually know, okay, that's what we actually have. We were so used to the old system because while it did change, it was fundamentally the same for a long period of time, 18 years or something like that. And that isn't the case here. And that is a push for better viewers because the tournament where you eliminate people or put people in is much more exciting than a 3-month storyline where somebody grinds out the last points they need to hit the non-peak benefit that they were going for or whatever. So, all of this, again, we've kind of opened up the discussion to a larger discussion about OP. But when it comes to Limited, I view Limited as one of those fundamental bedrock parts of Magic that, yes, aren't as flashy, but really do add a lot of substance and a lot of depth to these tournaments. And I also just love the fact that pros were challenged with 2 completely separate formats at the same time. And I felt like that really let us know who rose to the top because you couldn't just be a specialist. And I like that aspect too.
Yeah. And I do miss Limited being that skill testing. And look, at the end of the day, we know that the goal of professional play is not to determine who the best players are. Mm-hmm. That's part of the selling point is like, these are the best players in the world, but that's not the primary goal. And I think if it were limited, unquestionably be a part of that because it is so skill testing. But I think that there's a way, especially with these arena opens, to tie it all together in a way that really does give people kind of what they want. So
yeah,
we're hoping that'll happen.
Yeah, I am too. Now, one thing I did want to mention, this is along the lines of our variety show here because it just came to my mind, but it's related to this, is one cool thing that has popped up as a result of the changes is the league play that you've been, is that what they call it? I can't remember, but yeah, the league weekends, right? That you've been taking part in, where that actually goes contradictory to what we think about that, right? Like that actually will give us, maybe for the first time in Magic professional play history, a really good look at who the best player was or which player played the best for a full season of play because of the way that it's structured.
Yeah, we're seeing 84 matches, all the best players against each other. I think that it's going to be a pretty incredible time to see who put in the work, who ran well, who knows what they're doing. And I think that all is very, very cool.
Yeah. And to be clear, what Luis is describing is not just 84 matches against good players. It's 84 round robin matches where normally we play Swiss pairings. And that means that if you play in a tournament weekend, there's a heavy amount of variance that gets involved with regards to your matchups, both by player skill and also what deck they've brought to the table, where Luis and I could test for a tournament, the exact same tournament as each other. We could take the exact same list of cards to the tournament, feeling that our matchup was good against this and bad against this and okay against this. And I could come away not having made day 2, having played our quote bad matchup 5 of the 7 matches that I played for the day. And Luis could come away with an undefeated record, having only played it once and played our good matchup 6 times. Right.
I mean, to put it in perspective, Raptor didn't make day 2 with Cobblade and the Cobblade PT.
There you go.
And Ben S won the tournament. Like,
And like, so when you put that into that perspective, it makes you zoom out a lot to understand how many matches and tournaments you need to see before you really start judging who the best players are at a given time. But what if you played every other player in the tournament? Now, that isn't possible for a 400 or 500 player tournament, but it certainly is for, 32 player leagues or 64 or, whatever, where when you start getting the people paired down, and that's what we have here. When Luis plays on one of these weekends, he doesn't get to make the excuse that he ran bad and got his bad matchup in more times than it was represented in the tournament. He just has to play against everybody else who's in the Rivals League. All the other players. So it takes that whole idea of the variance of matchups completely off the table. And it also takes that same idea off the table of, well, I had to play against Paulo Finkel and Brad Nelson, and you had to play against 3 players that we've never heard of. It's safe to assume that the players I played against are of a higher quality than the ones that you did when it comes to Magic. And that's also completely off the table. Then the last checkbox that you'd want if you were like, well, I want to know who the best player is out of this group of players is sample size, right? You need to be able to play enough matches so that it wasn't just, well, I got mana screwed a few times or whatever. And that's what we're doing. They're playing 7 sessions of playing against everybody. That adds up a lot. And it actually is going to show us who was the best player for that kind of unequivocally. I mean, not that it's outside of the realm of variance to have some shifting around, but it's going to be really hard to argue that the person who finished, mid to late pack is played as well or did, as the person who finished first. That is not an argument that you're going to be able to make. And that's really exciting. I mean, I don't know if it sells as well, but it is built into how we do this. So we're kind of getting the best of both worlds here potentially with this OP setup. And also Luis is leading it. So Miles.
It is true that I am in first place in the Rivals League.
So there you go. A few more tournaments to go. Okay. Let's talk about some other stuff. One of the things that comes up in my mind quite a bit that Ryan and I used to hit on quite a bit, but it's a little harder to fit into the way that we do the show now, is just a fundamental part of Limited that I really like and I want to sort of put a highlight on, especially for people that are listening to this podcast that are a little newer to Magic and stuff. especially if this is like your first time listening to the show. If it is, welcome. We're super happy to have you along. If you love Magic and you love Limited, let me tell you, you have found the right place. But at any rate, if you're looking to get into Magic and you're thinking about playing Limited, I would highly recommend it. I think that there's some people who believe that Limited is too complicated or not a good place to start, but I disagree with that. Limited gives you some really great leg ups that you don't get if you start with Constructed. And the most kind of obvious one is that it levels the playing field. And I don't know how often this happens now, Luis, because a lot of people are introduced to Magic through digital, and I don't know how that exactly plays out. But the traditional way that people get into Magic is a friend teaches them, or two friends find it together and get it some pool of cards and they play. And then at one point, one friend will realize that if they go to the store and buy some packs, or if they go to Channel Fireball and order some singles, their deck is going to be better than the player who doesn't do that. And this arms race starts, right? And that extends beyond your circle of friends, because this sometimes just happens if you go to F&M, where you've got your starter deck that you built for cheap because you're still learning the game. You haven't invested a whole bunch of money into it or time, and you show up to F&M and the person who's playing against you has this fully fleshed out standard deck with all mythics and rares and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden you're facing down a scenario where you can't compete because they have better cards than you, and you open up your wallet and you don't have the budget for the cards. And you're like, well, this game isn't for me. I need to have $500 to be able to compete at this, and I don't have that right now, so I can't play. Your solution is to play Limited, because even though it does vary from like a sealed pool or a draft seat, everybody's on the same playing field when they sit down to play. Everybody gets 6 booster packs to build their sealed deck from. Everybody gets the same number of picks in a booster draft. And that way you don't have to have that arms race where you feel compelled to spend a bunch of money and all that stuff to get good, or to be able to even hang with somebody who has spent that amount of money early in their career there. I'm assuming on Arena, by the way, Luis, that this plays out in the sense of like you have one of those starter decks when you first start out and you're like, cool, I'll join a standard queue, and somebody smashes you with all mythics, where you're like, well, this is crap. I don't have enough wild cards and blah, blah, blah. I'm assuming it plays out like that.
Yeah, I think that's likely to be the case.
Yeah. And Limited really does solve for that. And then in addition to that, you get a few really cool things. One, well, you get to build your collection because you're opening up packs, but also getting value out of them by learning and playing and having fun. But those cards are left over. You can you could rare draft if you need the card, or if you want to sell it or whatever, or, maybe you get lucky in your sealed pool and open up some sweet rares. So your collection will start to build there that you can use for constructed decks. But on top of it, playing Limited gives you this sort of comprehensive Magic experience that you don't always get for Constructed, where a lot of times people just go online, look at a list for Constructed, download or, copy paste it or get the cards based off of a list, but they didn't actually build the deck. They don't really understand. Like, I bet you a lot of people, you ask them how many lands are in your deck, and they're like, I don't know. Right. Because I just copy pasted it into Arena. Right. And they don't know why it has 20 lands versus 27 or 28. They don't know what the mix of colors is in it and why that's the case. They don't know why there's random one of tap dual land in here. These are things that the people who build the decks have to choose. Well, when you play Limited, you learn how to build a mana base. You learn how to select cards for your deck, whether it's in sealed or in draft. You learn how to build a deck, right? You learn how to build a curve into your deck so that you can do things at most stages of the game. You learn how to implement bigger picture strategies. Like, this is going to be a control deck. I'm going to put the cards in my deck that aid me in that and leave the ones out that don't. These are things that also happen in Constructed on a broader scale. And, the best constructed players build or at least tweak their own decks for the most part. This is a way that can give you that kind of foundation while also developing your skill set in all of these ways I said, and also building up your collection in a way that is a level playing field versus the other. So I'm a huge proponent of telling people to dive in the deep end of the pool when it comes to getting into Magic. And to me, that is playing Limited, because it is overwhelming at first, but you get used to it a lot quicker than you think. And boy, you're teaching yourself everything all at once, and you don't have to mess with that stupid thing where I don't have the cards yet and I just can't compete. You can at Limited, as you learn to play.
Well, the thing that's cool too is even though limited in some ways has its expenses really, associated with it, which is you join a ladder game in constructed, it doesn't cost you anything. You join a draft, it does.
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side, you don't have to keep up with a collection. And then when a new set comes out and a rotation happens, everyone who likes to play constructed goes through the process of having to get all the cards for the new decks, and that can be a pretty big sink. Whereas you could take a couple months off, you could come back when a new set comes out, you could do whatever. For limited, it's all just one queue join away. And then one of the things that's also cool during the limited season, and I've seen this with a lot of folks, is once a format clicks for them, once they really get into the groove of it, you start seeing success to the point where you're not paying for your drafts anymore, or not very many of them.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And, that's the one last thing to bring up about this as well is, we've had Ryan on the show multiple times and from over at Going Optimal on his stream. And, he's also the original co-host for LR. And, he's really dedicated a lot of time with his spreadsheet to figuring out how to go optimal, as he puts it. That's actually where he came up with the name because, we were thinking of calling it Go Infinite, right? When we were talking about it. But, for him, it's more about, what do I want to get back out of this? Because it's not just about going infinite. It's also about getting the experience that you want back. And so it's more about going optimal. And that's why he came up with the name for it. And, he opened up an account with just the $5 or whatever, new player purchase that you can make where you get kind of a bunch of gems and stuff. And he hasn't added money to that, and he plays limited on it only. So you can continually draft. The question is, what's your win percentage and what are you willing to do outside of it with regards to grinding gold and stuff? And Ryan, he will teach you that. Like if you go to his stream at twitch.tv/goingoptimal and also check out his spreadsheet, which I'll put a link for in the show notes, you can figure out there's sliders on there where you can put in what your win percentage is or what your estimated win percentage is and where it needs to be for you to keep on drafting for free or maybe to put in minimal money. Free is kind of an arbitrary line, right? That's the most convenient. But, if I told you it was 15 cents a draft rather than free, you'd be like, great, right? I don't care. Like, $1
I think
will,
The other important thing too is, and I'm sure Ryan thought about this as well, your goal, not everyone can go infinite. Like that's just not going to be true of everyone. Everyone has a certain amount of time that they're willing to put into learning this, and maybe they haven't played Magic for millions of years, like me and Ryan, and now you. Mm-hmm. It's funny. I always think of you as a newcomer to Magic.
I know. I do too.
It's so funny, and it's been over a decade now.
Yeah,
and that's even not counting the fact that you did know the game, 20 years ago. But but anyways. There's going to be a lot of folks who it's just not in the cards, as it were, to go infinite. But that shouldn't be the goal. It's not success if I'm infinite, failure if I'm not. It's can you make the best decisions for whatever metrics you're trying to set out, and that's what Going Optimal espouses, which I think is a good message.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, Luis, how much time do we have for? We've got a few stories to tell here, but I know that you're a little bit on the clock. Where are we at here?
I got some good stories. I can give us some stories before we go.
Story us.
All right. So I have a bunch of stories that are all kind of connected. They're very funny. So one of them, it starts at Pro Tour Geneva. So this is a limited Pro Tour. Back when we had all limited Pro Tours, by the way. This is the Pro Tour that helped get me on the train. I actually got really greedy this Pro Tour in a shocking twist. 2 weeks before the PT, I played against my friend in the finals of a PTQ for the next Pro Tour.
Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm. And he had never played in a Pro Tour before. And I'm like, you know what? I'll concede. You can queue for the PT. I'm going to a PT in 2 weeks. And if I finish top 32, I'll queue anyway. I don't want to waste a qualification.
Wow. That is both extremely generous and also extremely cocky of you.
So I fly into the PT and I get there on Thursday because I had a final that I had to take on Tuesday, so I couldn't leave until Wednesday.
So you flew to Europe on the Thursday and you're playing on Friday. Okay.
Right. Play on Friday.
Best play. Hey, what you said it was limited. What does that mean at this time?
Time spiral block. It was a triple time spiral.
But what, like, are you playing sealed or?
No. All draft.
Okay,
Dude,
draft.
You don't understand how good we had it.
I know. This is before my time, and I'm so
You play
bummed.
2 drafts on day 1, and if you go 4 and 2, you make day 2. Then you do 2 more drafts, and If you do well enough on those, then you make top 8 or 3 more drafts. Sorry.
I'm so jealous. I never got to cover one of these either.
I know, it's absurd how sweet they are. So yeah, I fly in Thursday. I managed to 3-0 my last draft to finish in the top 32. So I qualified for the next Pro Tour. And this is the year where I got on the train, or if I had missed this PT, I just wouldn't have been on the train.
You probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. No.
And then I flew back. I had a 7 a.m. flight Sunday morning so I could get back in time for a final on Monday. And this, I literally was so tired at the end of this that I fell asleep at the gate, and they had to wake me up to tell me, hey, your plane's leaving.
Oh my God, the riskiest.
And then I got on the plane, out like a light as soon as I got into my seat. Didn't wake up for food, didn't wake up for anything. At the end of it, the flight attendant, she's like, you look like you're sleeping, so I don't want to wake up. You're all right though, right? I'm like, yeah, I was just really tired. I go home. I crush my final by getting probably a mediocre passing grade because I did not study a single bit. Anyways, I didn't have the craziest story there in terms of travel. Ben Rubin had that so Ben Rubin, he's a Hall of Famer, but not at this time he wasn't. But a great player. He ended up landing in Frankfurt and it couldn't get a flight to Geneva. His flight got delayed. So he found a taxi driver and was like, I need to get there and I need to get there ASAP. He was flying in late as well. And the taxi driver was like, I don't have a passport. And this is after going through like 3 or 4 taxi drivers, none of them who was willing to take him. But the taxi driver was, but you know what? If you're game, I'm game to try. So
really?
They take this really long cab ride. At the border, Ben explains what's happening and manages to like let the taxi driver cross.
Oh my God.
And he gets there like just in time for the PT.
So he just drove all night basically?
Yes. I don't remember how he did it at the PT. But that's connected slightly because Worlds in Paris, this is now the year before, there was this Polish Magic player whose online handle was Przemol, Przemol. None of us knew this guy. We didn't know him. We didn't know his friends. All we knew is he always won. He was just this like incredibly good player. He's from Poland. Worlds is in Paris. His flight gets canceled and he decides to drive the entire way.
Oh, from Poland to Paris?
Yeah. So
that's a drive.
Let's see.
You have to go decent chunk there, right?
So when you're driving there, it takes you, I think it was something like 15 hours and 8 minutes is what it says.
So that's a real drive. Yeah.
But his flight was the day before. So what happened? He took a 15-hour drive, got to Worlds during round 3. So, but had already contacted the tournament officials. Okay. So he started 0-3.
Oh my goodness.
He grounded a top 16.
What?
After a 15-hour drive and starting the tournament in round 4, fresh off your 15-hour drive, which, by the way, ended in the middle of Paris. The tournament's in the Louvre. I'm sure, like, parking and hotel and all that was...
It was in the Louvre?
Yes.
Oh, my God.
You missed all the cool ones, Marshall. You really did.
I really did, yeah.
But so he goes there, and so his name is... oh, man, Polish names are rough. Przemysław Wolowiec, something like that.
Where has this guy been since I've been doing coverage?
I think he found he probably had to go defend a math PhD or something, like go become a chess master. I don't know. We all this guy was one of the like famous moto grinders. We all thought he was incredibly good, and I've never talked to him, but this story was so good. He drove for 15 hours, shows up starting 0-3, and ends up going like 12-1 or something. To finish out like in the top 16.
We should ask Gregors if he knows him, like if he's like a legend over there,
Yeah.
It's you know how cool. Sometimes people are like really well known regionally, but they don't bother to break through on the biggest stage often enough. So it's kind of like everybody from there knows them. Maybe he's like that.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised.
Incredible.
But yeah, so those are some pretty good travel stories back in the days of traveling.
Boy, it really resonates for me too, like because of how tiring travel can be to show up. The first pro tour I did was Barcelona, and I had my job still at AT&T, so I was like, I'm going to take a vacation day and then another one on Monday, because of the travel and like trying to fit it into my normal life schedule. And I had been to Europe a bunch of times on my own, but I went when I was like a kid. I was like 19 or 20 or, I was young. And I didn't really know how to do travel. Like nobody taught me. So I would just get over there and sleep and just screw everything up and be jet lagged. And I just had no idea what I was doing. Well, by the time I started doing this, I hadn't traveled like that in a long time. And I didn't really understand how it worked until a while later about like my body adjusting and all that. I also had never done coverage of the Pro Tour. I'd done like 1 or 2 GPs and they're like, do you want to do the Pro Team? And I'm like, yeah. And so I show up and I have no idea what to expect. And I was a complete wreck. I remember being asleep in the hotel room during the day for one of the days because I showed up on Thursday night like that. I just rolled in there like, hey, what's up, everybody? And then Friday morning we're on the air, or Friday during the day we're doing stuff, whatever it was. And it was freaking brutal. So you doing that, but also having to play, I totally feel. And in fact, I have a real distinct memory. I remember Rich Hagen came up to me during the tournament and I was just sitting there and he goes, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. But I really was not. I remember being so tired from that. I had a couple of stories, short ones, just a couple of bad beat stories that I've actually told before, but they're kind of fun.
Well, it's not a true bad beat story if you haven't told it at least 10 times.
Yeah, exactly. It's a feature.
You've been around me at a PT where I finish the round, I come tell you my story, whether it's a bad or good beat, whatever. But then someone else comes up, so I tell them. And then someone else comes up, and I'm like, yeah.
Hey, have you heard this story? Yeah. But you, to be fair though, you're very selective. Like you're very self-aware of the not that interesting bad beat story, and you don't bother with those. Like if you lost because you got mana screwed or whatever, I'll be like, how did the round go? And you'll say, I lost. Right. And if I ask, you'll say, I just didn't draw enough lands. Like it's not a complaint. It's just the truth. Right. But like, there was nothing I could do, but you don't, I'm always been grateful that you don't delve, because I remember I came from poker into this. So I'm like,
oh my God, yeah.
Inundated.
I've just heard enough bad beat stories for my entire life. I don't need to subject people to them.
Yeah,
the good bad beat stories can be good.
The good ones
are actually good.
Right. And I also don't mind it when people tell me the reason that they lost, as long as there isn't the impetus put on me to be shocked and awed that they didn't draw their third land. Right. Like it's happened to me before. It'll happen to you too. So these ones are.
Wait, let me get this straight. Mm-hmm. You had kings and they had jacks, but they beat you.
Right.
How could that have happened?
Right. Like,
Tell me more.
And it's also just like, well, I have kings, and it's like, well, you're going to lose. There's a jack on the flop. It's like, well, my money's on jacks, right? It's like, dude, I know where this is going. I've heard this one. Anyway, a couple of just quick stories. One of them was from GP Portland. I think it was a side event. I can't remember for sure, but my opponent mulls to 5 or 6 of them, and they're on the play. And they're really talkative and chatty, and I'm like trying to be serious, and this is M11 sealed or something like that. I can't remember. And they're like, go ahead. And I'm like, no, you won the die roll. Like, you get to pick. They're like, yeah, go ahead. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like, you haven't done anything. And they're just like, I'm passing the turn to you. And I'm like, okay. And they haven't played a land or done anything. They kept the hand with no lands in it at all and just said go. And I'm like, all right, I guess this is going to be easy. So I play a land and say go. And then they're just like, yeah, go ahead. After they draw their card, they don't hit a land. And I'm like, all right. Well, I start drawing like kind of a significant number of lands, and it's making me like slightly nervous because my opponent then starts playing a land every turn. And I'm like, oh, wow, they're really ripping those lands here. But still, I'm thinking I got this, right? I mean, they didn't do anything for the first few turns in the game, including play lands. Normally, I'd think I could beat somebody if they didn't do anything for those turns, even if they had the lands. And as it turns out, they just go straight into a Titan. I believe it was Frost Titan. It may have been Inferno. I can't remember, but these were in the limited format at the time. And I got absolutely decimated by a player who kept a no-lander on the play and missed their first 2 land drops. And I was like, maybe this game's not for me. Then in another one, this is more just like sort of a comical bad beat. I was playing a PTQ, it was modern, and I was playing Temur Delver, which is my favorite constructed deck of all time. You know, Tarmogoyf, Delver of Secrets, bunch of counter spells, some burn spells, Lightning Bolt. Loved it. My opponent was playing Titan Valakut, and they tapped 6 lands to play Primeval Titan, and I didn't have a counter, but I was looking pretty good. I was beating down with like a Vendilion Click in the air and a Tarmogoyf. I'm like, I'm going to be all right here. So I'm like, all right. So they play the Titan. They go get a couple of Valakuts or whatever it was. And then on their turn, they play a mountain and they're like, trigger my Valakits. And I'm like, okay, wait a second. And I look, and one of the lands that they had was an Evolving Wilds or whatever. And I'm like, that was one of your lands that you used to cast the Titan. And they're like, oh crap. Yeah, it was. So we're like, okay, call the judge. So we call the judge comes over and they're like, well, it's just too late now. Like we can't rewind this because there was searching. There's a trigger on the stack. Sorry, but to me, you would have had to have noticed it earlier. Game rule violation for them, but like play on. And I'm just like, oh, wow, like this is a huge difference because as with any Magic game, every turn counts, but particularly with Temur Delver, there's a lot of turns where it's like hit you for 7, bolt you, and the game's over, where it didn't feel like that was what was, Snapcaster, bolt, Snapcaster, that kind of stuff. Instead, my opponent plays their mountain, domes me with it, and I'm like, oh, this isn't good. And then they look up at me and they're like, crack my Evolving Wilds. And I'm just like, oh my God. And they killed me with the mountain that they got off of the wild. So that was like the best Evolving Wilds in the history of the game, probably. Like
that reminds me of a really good one where it was a European limited Grand Prix, and one of the players played a turn 2 Briarberry cohort, so 1 in a blue for a 1/1 flyer that's got +1/+1 if you have another blue creature, and they pass the turn. Their opponent plays something, they pass turn back. They go to attack, and they realize they accidentally put Isleback Spawn into play. And Isleback Spawn is a 5 blue, 7 mana, 4/8 Shroud, and as long as one of the players has 20 or fewer cards, it has +4/+8 or something like that. And they call a judge. And the judge is like, so what happened last turn? He's like, well, I said I cast Briarberry Cohort, which shows I do have in hand, but I accidentally put Isleback Spawn on the table. And they're like, well, did you notice it? And they're like, no. Did the opponent notice it? No. It's your turn again? Oh, well, it's too late. You have an Isleback Spawn in play.
Oh, my God.
And I like to think that this wouldn't be ruled like this now, but this was 12 years ago or whatever. Yeah. So then they played the Briarberry Cohort. Now it's a 2/2 because the spawn's in play, so it gets +1/+1.
Yeah, that is really similar. Yeah, 2 other quick stories. One of them was at a local shop for some type of smaller regional thing. I can't remember, but my opponent was playing a deck that had a lot of library manipulation in it. Like maybe it was a Splinter Twin deck or something. And they played Halimar Depths, which lets you look at the top 3 cards of your library. It's a land that ETB's taps for blue. And you look at the top 3 cards of your library and you can put them back in any order. And they did that, but then they were like, wow, those are crap. And they picked up their library and just started shuffling it like you would if it was a Ponder, which they also had in their deck. And their brain just shortcut to I cast Ponder, but really it was just Halimar Depths. So in reality, it was probably land. So they were probably landlocked for the next 3 turns of the game instead of getting to shuffle them away. And I noticed it. I was like, whoa. And they had already like mass shuffled it, 1.5 times. And I'm like, that was not Ponder. And they're like, oh, so I called the judge, but there isn't one because it's a small shop. So the shop owner's like a level 1 judge at the best. And they're just like, yeah, there's nothing we can do. Just carry on. So, I mean, that's rough because the person did that. And then the last one is really funny. It was at, States, I believe, or it could have been a PTQ, but was it Jun Charm? Does Jun Charm shuffle in libraries?
No.
What was the one that there's a charm or something like that allows you to shuffle in a library. Or at least that's what the player thought. Maybe I can't remember, but at any rate, this was one of the most ambitious judges I've ever met in my life. So what happened was the person cast a card and the players thought that it let them shuffle their library in. And it might have actually been that that's what the card did. I can't remember. So they did.
Jun Charm exiles the whole graveyard. So they probably thought it put it into the library instead of exiling.
That's probably it. Yeah. Now there was, I believe, 9 cards at that time in the graveyard, and they had a lot going on with what they affected on the board. So the judge says, okay, but you've already shuffled them in. And the player's like, yeah, I did. And the judge looks at the guy who called, who's a friend of mine, and says, well, do you remember what cards were in the graveyard? And he's like, yeah. And the other guy's like, I remember too. And they're like, okay, let's recreate this graveyard, which they did. I mean, we'll never know if they actually got it right or not, but they literally went through his library and picked out all the cards that they thought was in the graveyard to recreate it. So that judge wins Ambitious Judge of the Year award. And I've never seen anything like that. I think that was like not the correct.
Right. We're going to cap off our stories with one that takes that to the next level times 1,000.
Okay.
The setting is Japanese Nationals 2005.
Mm-hmm.
It's the finals. One player mind-slavers the other player.
Mm-hmm.
It's Tron against like Big Red. That was the decks back then. The Big Red player has a Frostling, which is a 1-mana 1/1 that can sack to deal 1 damage to target creature. Mm-hmm. It's like a Mog Fanatic, but it can't hit players, only creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And it's equipped with a Sword of Fire and Ice, which gives it protection from blue and protection from red.
Mm-hmm.
The Mindslaver player takes the person's turn, makes them use some of their spells, then says, I'll sack Frostling to kill itself.
Okay.
Can't do that.
No legal target there, yeah.
But it's target itself.
Right.
So the game ends, they win. As the player, and they're announced as that they're like, this is the national champion. People are cheering. But then someone's like, wait, you can't sack Frostling.
Oh, no.
So, of course, it was too late. The tournament ended. They were the national champion. Unless the judges did something unprecedented. And in fact, if you talk to some of the high-level judges who were around back then, that is never going to happen again.
Uh-huh.
They rewound the game state because it was being filmed for coverage.
Wow.
To exactly the same game state, the same hands, the same graveyards, and played it from there, and the other guy won.
Oh my God, that's incredible.
And
wow.
That would happen just about nowhere else. Because first of all, you need the right combination of judges plus it being filmed, plus the judges all telling each other, yeah, we can do this, right? Yeah, I'm sure that's what it was.
This will be perfect.
And the players kind of had to agree, including the guy who won, which I think is going to be a rarity. Like, all credit to the guy who won, or who didn't win but was going to have won, because that's a hard call to make. Maybe they felt pressured into it. Maybe they felt it was the right thing to do. Who knows? But I got to give them credit for kind of acquiescing to do that, because I don't think they would do that without both players being on board. Of course, the guy who lost probably was like, sure.
Yeah, because it does feel like it's like the person with integrity would say, I want the outcome to be correct, but I'm not confident that we can get back to that point, right? Where
I don't think it would have been unreasonable at all to be like, no, this is not cool, like whatever. But anyways, that's how that got rewound, and we have a different winner forever in history, which I want to say is actually Junya Ianaga, who then won Worlds in 2011 after beating the entirety of Team CFB on his way there.
In top 8, I remember Junya. Yeah, wow. It still plays, by the way. He was in one of these online tournaments.
No, I know.
You played him, right?
I played him just recently, yeah.
Did he still smack you around?
Oh, yeah, he beat me badly, I think.
He's unbeatable. All right, well, let's call it a show there. Hopefully you had fun with us hanging out for a little bit of relaxed holiday vibes here on LR this week. If you want to find us on social media, we can be found. I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. We've also got everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com, including like our streams. I've been streaming. I stream once a week now, Tuesday in the afternoon, Pacific time. I've been drafting. You can come hang out, say hi. Luis streams more than I do, a variety of different things. So you can get links to our streams there. And again, everything else, with regards to the show. We want to remind you about all the great Black Friday deals going on over at CFB. You've got the CFB Pro deal. You've got the daily Black Friday specials and the 20% back in store credit on cash purchases on singles. You can check all of that out at channelfireball.com. And we want to say thank you, as always, for hanging out and listening. We'll see you next week.
Well, as a quick outro before we take off, one thing that we're doing that I think is going to be cool for our Thanksgiving is we are doing a contactless food swap with the folks near us. So that would be Casa Nasty, the Matt Nass crew. So
that's cool. I'm
basically making an extra pan of mac and cheese and an extra pan of Brussels sprouts, and we're going to drop that off at their place before we all eat. And I think they have a couple things brewing too. So hopefully that works out well. It's what we got in here in 2020. But I hope everyone has happy and safe holidays, whatever it is they do. And we will see you next week.